This video, we're going to compare the iPhone 15 with the Samsung Galaxy S23. Now this comparison is going to be divided into 5 different sections, so we'll talk about the display, the specs, the cameras, the price and other features, and ultimately, which one should you pick. So to kick things off, let's talk about the display. So the iPhone 15 maintains the 6.1-inch Super Retina XDR display with the ceramic shield, and it also maintains the 60Hz refresh rate from last year, which is not ideal. However, it loses the notch for the dynamic island. The resolution is also bumped up to 2556 by 1179, creating a higher pixel density of 460. Now, when compared to the S23 also has a 6.1-inch display, but that's a dynamic AMOLED display with a 120Hz refresh rate and a resolution of 2340 by 1080, creating a pixel density of 425, which is actually lower than the iPhone 15. So when you're comparing the displays, there's a few things you have to consider. Samsungs generally have a more vivid and a more saturated display as opposed to the iPhone, so the colors pop out a little bit more. And the S23 also has a higher refresh rate, which for whatever reason Apple still hasn't implemented in the normal models. It does have it in the Pro models, but you still get a 60Hz display on an $800 iPhone, which in 2023 is a bit beyond my understanding. Moving on though, let's talk about the specs. The iPhone 15 borrows the A16 Bionic from last year's iPhone Pro models. You get the Apple GPU, you get 6 gigs of RAM. The storage starts at 128 and goes all the way up to 512. Again, not expandable like every iPhone. And Apple does not mention a specific number for the battery, but they do say you get all-day battery life, so you can make whatever you want out of that. Or you also get IP68 water and dust resistance with the iPhone 15 as well. Now talking about the Galaxy S23, you get the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the Adreno 740 GPU, you get 8 gigs of RAM. The storage also, just like the iPhone, is not expandable and starts at 128, goes all the way up to 512. You get a massive 3900 mAh battery, and the S23 is also IP68 certified. But moving on, let's talk about the cameras because that is the more interesting bit of a comparison. So the S23 has a massive 50-megapixel wide sensor. The iPhone 15 has a 48-megapixel wide sensor. The S23 has a 12-megapixel ultra-wide, similar to the iPhone 15, and the S23 has a dedicated lens for a 10-megapixel telephoto lens. On the iPhone 15, however, Apple uses the main 48-megapixel wide sensor to create a 12-megapixel telephoto picture. So although there's not a dedicated lens for it, you can still take telephoto pictures from the iPhone 15. Now, this is where things get a bit crazier because the S23 has 8K video recording capabilities up to 30 frames per second, which the iPhone does not. The iPhone can only do 4K up to 60 FPS, which the S23 can as well. And the S23 can do slow motion video up to 960 frames per second in 1080p compared to 240 on the iPhone. The iPhone has a cinematic mode, and the S23 can do videos in HDR10+. Now coming to the front cameras, they both share a 12-megapixel sensor, so they both have a 12-megapixel sensor for the front camera. The iPhone 15, however, can do 4K video up to 60 FPS, whereas the S23 is only limited to 30 frames per second. So yeah, there's a bit of disparity when it comes to the cameras because you do get that additional lens in the S23. And as for the iPhone, it'll have to be tested in real world to see how the 12-megapixel telephoto picture, which is produced by the main lens, comes out. So again, that'll require testing, but yeah, it's a good thing to have, even without a lens. Now moving on to the colors and the price. So the S23 comes in cream, green, lavender, graphite, and phantom black, and starts at $799. The iPhone 15 comes in black, pink, blue, green, and yellow, and also starts at $799. So again, a few different colors in both the devices at the same price point, but which one should you buy? Now there's a few things you have to consider here. So if you are in that Apple ecosystem and you're looking to upgrade your older iPhone, then by all means the iPhone 15 is a solid upgrade. It is building upon a good foundation from the iPhone 14, keeping the good things and improving on the ones that were not so good. And you do also get USB Type-C, so if you have multiple devices, then that's one cable for all of them. You have to note though, it's only limited to USB-C 2, so it's not the USB-C 3 or the Thunderbolt speed, so the transfer speeds will be a bit slower. And the other thing the iPhone 15 does miss out on, which I mentioned previously, is that 60 Hz display. So again, if that's a big deal for you, then again, it's something the S23 has. And another thing the iPhone 15 misses out is always on display, which the S23 also has. So again, I think Apple is still using the same OLED panel, but they're only bringing the always on display to the Pro lineup as opposed to the normal 15, which again is a bit beyond my understanding because it's the same display. It can have all that features. But again, if that is something that you really prefer to have on a device, then S23 is the better bet. And then again, if you are in that Samsung sort of ecosystem and you use features like the Samsung Desk for a desktop or just Samsung phones in general, then the S23 again is building on a really solid foundation from the S22, and it is an amazing phone. And again, end of the day, it really comes down to preference, because if you are an iPhone user and you want to stick with an iPhone, then you will really go with an iPhone. Or if you are a Samsung user and only stick with Samsung, then you probably will buy a Samsung phone. So it does come down to personal preference, but I'll again like to point out, these phones are not a big revolution, they're just evolution from the previous generation, and that is not necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, that's pretty much